I'm originally from the Netherlands, moved here 23 years ago with my wife. She's also Dutch. And I always wanted to do something different. In the Netherlands, everything is very organized and planned. So I always wanted to leave the Netherlands and go somewhere else. And something is like, okay, why don't we just go to New Zealand for a couple of years and see how that goes. I was always fascinated by creating more than just doing a job. I had like business cards when I was 12 and I set up my little business, but I didn't really know what to do because I had no parents that are in business, so they couldn't support me through the process. They're pretty well off, but they're still not entrepreneurs. So in New Zealand we had an opportunity to do something and learn about business, and that's the great thing about New Zealand, I think, is that it's very easy to start a business and do business and try new things.
Thanks for coming on, joining us in the lounge. Obviously, you had a bit of a part to play in actually planning of the production of creating the podcast, because we've been talking about it for a while, and obviously now we've been doing it for a little while. But it'd be really interesting to, hear your story and kind of how that's played out and how it's influenced your views on wealth, but kind of just in general, kind of holistically, what is wealth to you? So that's kind of why I thought I'd get you on. And yeah, great to have you on.
Well, thanks for the invitation.
So what was it that started you wanting to create wealth? Was there a moment or an event?
Yeah, definitely. It's probably kind of being on the other side. When I was so I'm originally from the Netherlands, moved here 23 years ago with my wife. She's also Dutch. And I always wanted to do something different. So in the Netherlands, like everything is very organized and planned. So you pretty much kind of like do your career and then you kind of work somewhere, and then you can almost see where your future is going. Not that to that extent, but it's pretty much kind of like very planned. So I always wanted to leave the Netherlands and go somewhere else. So when my wife and I traveled around doing our OE in 1998. Oh my God, that's like a long time ago, 26 years ago. We also traveled around New Zealand, and we didn't have like immediately the idea of I want to live in New Zealand, but we went back to the Netherlands and back in our jobs, and something is like, okay, why don't we just go to New Zealand for a couple of years and see how that goes. So yeah, we moved to New Zealand in 2001, and yeah, like I was always kind of working on wealth. I was always fascinated by creating more than just doing a job.
Yeah.
And so that didn't really fit the Dutch kind of like culture anyway. So I had like business cards when I was 12 and I set up my little business, but I didn't really know what to do because I had no parents that are in business. So they couldn't support me through the process. I mean, they're pretty well off, but they're still not entrepreneurs. So in New Zealand, we had an opportunity to do something and learn about business. And that's the great thing about New Zealand, I think, is that it's very easy to start a business and do business and try new things. So I started to try a couple of things and pretty much like learned the hard way. So we started a business and had another business, and then eventually had a business with a friend of mine that didn't go well at all. So we kind of got a bit in financial trouble. Yeah. Ended up selling the house to get rid of debt. And then rented for 7 years. And then basically kind of at that stage, I really kind of made the conscious decision, like I have to do something about it. This is not good enough. I need to do something to actually create wealth. Yeah. And I've always been in marketing, and it's like, I just need to start a traditional digital marketing agency, which we did. But it was kind of very much like I've always been working on wealth, and I'm talking about financial wealth, by the way. So it's and that's only part of it, right? Like you can be rich, and rich has like different aspects, I believe, and financial wealth is part of that. But yeah, family is still my number one when I look at like how rich I am. But yeah,
so what was the first thing what was the first thing you decided in terms of creating wealth that you were going to put into action, and what did that look like?
That's a really good question. So one thing I think is kind of, you go through like multiple learnings, and in Charlie, you can attest to this, right? So you've had some hard learnings as well. So you go through like you're starting a business, and I had a business. So the business eventually that we built and sold, that was the fourth attempt of a business.
Yeah.
So every time you kind of adapt and you learn and you kind of remove things that don't work and then start like, okay, well, try something that does work. So you fine tune it to your own skills, because I think you also have to be realistic within, your skills and your attitude and everything else. So what works? So I kind of, it was more like I started to learn what doesn't work, and then I started to do the opposite.
Yep.
Like this classic, we use a lot of that kind of a T tool. Not T towel, but T tool, where you go on one hand, you write what's not working, and because it's really easy to come up with negative stuff for everybody all the
Yes.
time, but then it forces you to look at the other side. Okay, well, so what can work or what does work, and what is the positive side of it? So from that and the previous businesses we had, I pretty much kind of, or me, my wife and I, we learned that don't start a business with your best friend.
Yes.
That went really wrong for us. Never lose track of the numbers. So that friend of mine, we had like a really good time. I created like this really creative business that was burning cash. And so I really forced myself to be kind of like always kind of present on the numbers. That's why I always push on numbers now, because in the end, although my background is marketing, I know that you can't run a business if you're not 100% across your numbers and realistically, not kind of making up numbers.
Yep.
In terms of your forecasts. And then I think the other one was like to your skills. So my background is digital marketing. It's like, okay, that's the easiest thing for me to create is something around a business that has to do with digital marketing. And it's kind of something that doesn't require a lot of investment capital. So it was a service-based business. And I know service-based businesses do not have the software as a service type of multiples that we obviously expect from when we invest in startups. But I knew I could build it linearly and kind of like linearly that way, and then scale it up and down quite easily, and it's relatively low risk. So yeah, that's kind of what we started to do, and then we kind of evolved it from there.
What was the thinking behind not starting a business with a best friend?
That's because that's my experience. And it's actually when we invest in startups now, we look at that relationship and not making sure that, I don't invest in people that are best friends, because it is risky. And the reasoning behind it is that it's really hard to have like tough love and hold each other like 100% accountable, unbiased when you're in that situation.
Right.
Because there is that relationship. So it becomes more like a friends type of business, which is potentially okay for a small business. But if you want to build something that's big, there will be a phase. There'll be lots of really hard decisions that need to be made. And it's just harder to make a decision with a friend.
Do you not find that you'd get some benefits though from the ability to stick it out? Do you not find that, you may have actually experienced that it was the opposite?
Yeah.
But in terms of kind of, you require resilience every time something goes wrong, and in startup land, and I guess in small business land as well, startup land I'd say is a little bit more, you get kicked in the face often. But those times are really dark, especially when you're going from 0 to 1, right? Because when you have nothing and you're going to something that's a kind of functioning organism almost, which I would kind of consider a startup business or a small business.
Yeah.
I guess it's kind of the opposite almost of the Y Combinator approach. They're very encouraging of roommates and kind of close college friends creating startups. So that's why I wanted to kind of get that. So you're kind of you're kind of taking it more from the angle of, well, you might not be able to have the hard conversations.
Well, maybe look at it this way, with Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg, he started that business officially kind of with his best friend or roommate, right? Yeah. So you either create a really successful business potentially, or you keep the friendship.
Right.
Yeah.
And that friendship didn't work out that well in the end.
Yeah.
And there's lots of examples of that. I'm not saying that the business can't be successful, but it will impact the friendship.
The relationship. Yeah.
And for us, it impacted both.
Right.
The friendship and the business. The business didn't work out well. So it's I don't know. It's just my kind of experience.
It was your learning.
Yeah, because I did end up setting up a business with my wife. So everybody can say, well, that's not a smart thing to do. So, yes.
Quite a lot of those in New Zealand as well. Startup founder partners, like duos that are also married. I've noticed like a bunch of SaaS products that are like that.
Yeah.
So was your wife always, so did you guys approach creating wealth as a team unit, or was it like a conversation that evolved over time? Like, how did that look for you guys? If you were at some point, or maybe now, partners in a business with her?
Yeah, it's definitely more driven by me with her support. So she has different aspirations when it comes to kind of different goals.
Yeah.
But we're in this, want to go into the same direction. I think that's really important. Like how that looks like in the end is like different for her than it is for me.
Yeah.
In terms of she's kind of more satisfied with less probably.
Yes.
And which is perfectly fine. I think she's, but but it supports each other. We definitely looked at it together and go, okay, well, the minimum we want to achieve is X in terms of financial freedom, and then we work towards that. And then I've got way bigger aspirations, but she's like, okay, well, for me that's it.
That's it.
Oh, that's it. Like do whatever you want to do. She fully supports it. And we're still working together, but it's definitely she's kind of like happy with where we are at.
Yeah.
Which is also fine.
So what are you both working on now in terms of creating wealth?
Like a range of different things. So the business we set up called Catchy, we sold it in 2018 to the Havas Group, which is a global agency group based in Paris. They're part of Vivendi, which is globally listed. I think it's the 5th largest agency group in the world. So they initially bought into the business at 60%, and then we had this traditional kind of agency kind of arrangement, right, with the earn-out and then a buyout after quite a long period of time. I had 4.5 years.
Okay.
So, that's long. Yeah, it's not a good learning, by the way.
Yeah.
Well, you learn from that.
You learn from that. But they always treated us really well, and it was a good partnership, so it worked out well. So we exited the shareholding side in December 22.
Yeah.
And then I decided to stay on a bit longer as well, because I want to take a sabbatical and take the children and my wife, so basically the 4 of us going like traveling through Europe for a couple of months. So we did that last year, and I'm still kind of like finishing up at the moment, basically.
So what's in one of the other balls that you've got going on in terms of creating wealth?
So basically finishing up that at the moment, and then do a lot of investing work now. So I'm on 5 boards. Yeah. Including the advisory board at Medition, and then also I'm part of the Flying Kiwi Angels and do quite a lot of investing with them, and also directly as well in startups, a bit in property, but that's more kind of, it's not really my interest, but it's just something, more kind of, if everything else goes wrong, at least we've got that.
You've got property.
Yeah, because we do invest, it's high risk investments when I really look at kind of our portfolio as such. So definitely over-leveraged, I would say, in the startup space.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, I love risk and excitement and business. So I think you kind of, when you set up a business and you exit the business, you almost kind of have this goal vacuum where you go, okay, well, what's next, right? What do you do? Any business owner will have that. Like if you list something or you sell it, and you go, well, that was such a part of my life, building up that business, and almost becomes part of your identity. And you go, well, I have to recreate myself. So I'm a bit in that phase at the moment, although that it's going well, and definitely it's going more towards actively investing and I'm also doing some consultancy work, management consultancy work, in terms of digital marketing, digital transformation, which is kind of a bit of an overused word, and helping companies become more and more profitable, because that's always what I've done in terms of my own business. So we've created this investment group, really looking into investing more and more businesses of all sorts, including kind of like mergers and acquisitions. So we're working through a roll-up at the moment for a couple of businesses. So it's quite fluid, I would say, at the moment. But yeah.
Okay, and so you've got, like, throughout, I suppose, your career, you've had some great successes and some very good learning experiences. In terms of, I suppose, like trying to juggle the whole family, health, mental health, focusing on businesses and that kind of thing. Is there anything that you've done to try and kind of keep all 4 of those balls in the air to balance yourself out? Or have you had experiences where actually you're focused on the business and some of those other balls maybe have not had the attention that they needed?
Yeah, that's a really good question. For sure, I see it like spinning plates. Like you've got, you're kind of trying to keep all these plates up. And definitely there was a phase in the beginning when you build a business, it's pretty much all you do. It's like 80 hours plus a week, just kind of doing the business. And I'm sure like Charlie can attest to this as well. It's all in, right? Because it's like launching a rocket. You need to just get it into orbit, and then you kind of have more space because it's floating and you have an opportunity to reflect. But you need to get there first. So in the beginning it was hard. I was just all focusing on the business. We had little children at that stage. They were only actually 2 and 0.
2 and 0, newborn. Woo.
Yeah, newborn. So it wasn't the best time to launch a business. But I tried to keep that balance as much as possible. But I was sometimes out of balance, certainly kind of around, I would say, health. So I didn't really do any exercise as such. And now it's rebalancing. And over the last couple of years, I've definitely tried to kind of keep it as much as possible, like trying to keep it in balance. Because I think it all needs to work.
Yeah.
Otherwise, if you focus on one thing too much, the rest will fall over.
Yep.
For me, even though I'm very business focused, it's always family first for me. Hence, I probably haven't built a $100 million or $1 billion business because maybe that needs more focus on the business side. I don't know, but it's definitely been. I've always found it really important to spend a lot of time with my children and my wife. And then over the last couple of years, I've been focusing more on health and exercise. So I do exercise almost every day.
Yeah.
And that's also linked to mental health, to be honest. Like it releases endorphins, which is kind of more sustainable. So I exercise every morning, and it really kind of is almost a bit of my meditation in a way. I should meditate. I don't. I know everybody says, like, you need to meditate,
yep.
Which is definitely true. So my meditation is kind of my exercise in a way at the moment.
Yep.
And I feel a lot better since I've been doing that in terms of mental health and being able to focus and then actually make the right decisions for the business.
Yes.
Versus just being always busy and reactive.
Yeah.
So I think that's
been a bit fun. Do you think decision fatigue is a thing?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Do you think that's actually potentially, what do you think that the biggest kind of catalyst then is for a business that ultimately kind of fizzling out? Do you think it's for decision fatigue? If there's one thing, what would you say it would be in that case?
For a business fizzling
out and kind of just not reaching its potential?
Well, that's hard to say, right? Because there's so many different things. It's like there's a couple of startups at the moment that I'm involved with that are kind of in that phase that they're not working that well, and the owners are or the founders are burning out slowly. And it's kind of, I think that's the most important reason why a business stops, because the owners get fatigued. And they run out of cash, and then they run out of gas,
mental gas.
Yeah, absolutely, momentum, and you kind of. It really takes a special person to be able to deal with rejection and, I would say, disappointment on on an ongoing basis, and just kind of like fall on the floor and just stand up again and shake yourself, shake it off, and just keep going. And you can do that, and like a normal person might be able to do that 10 times, but sometimes it takes a lot more than that to actually be able to have that business be successful. And some businesses never be successful. I think that's also the other thing. Like, if you only read about all the successful businesses, but if you look at all the other startups that are out there, and we know the numbers, like, what is it, like 1 in 10, maybe 1 in 20 has some kind of level of success.
Of real success.
And
then there's probably a couple in there that kind of make it to 1, but not necessarily to the stars. But then you also see businesses kind of find themselves kind of fumble around to something and then reinvent themselves again later, and then there's this resurgence. So it's
Absolutely.
I kind of see businesses as like as a living thing.
Yes.
And even when you look at something like an Apple or a Lululemon or kind of an Nvidia, you kind of see these businesses and you go, well, can they do it? Can they reinvent themselves again? You know, you go from the iPod to the iPhone, or to then the next thing. And I think that's like in the case of Apple as an example, which is far divorced from a startup. They have to kind of endure that same kind of reincarnation almost, if they want to keep going and keep generating kind of like compounding growth, which when you're in a startup realm and you're actually just trying to find something that works, because obviously when you're Apple you have all these things that are working ultimately. You have computers and devices that you're selling, services, etc. Whereas the startup's just trying to find one thing that works on repeat, and then just kind of can go. And that's kind of that first, when you said then you can reflect. Like there's this whole period of time where and it goes to anything from a small project to a side hustle to probably even kind of deeply understanding a subject like computer science, where you're kind of you're kind of learning, and then eventually it kind of more intuitively makes sense. A little bit like jiu-jitsu. Like when I think about like 6 years into jiu-jitsu, I think 5 or 6 years into jiu-jitsu, and I'm not thinking anymore. Whereas when you start something new, you're kind of like the cogs are going, and you're like, okay, this, and then eventually it kind of comes together. And I guess with a business, where you get that feedback is ultimately your customer. And are you building something that people want? And then is there something that is repeatable that then the people that want it can consume easily? So yeah.
Sometimes they don't know what they want. I mean, that's obviously the whole Apple analogy as well, right?
I think that's true. I really think that's true. Like, because when I think about what we're trying to do, and I think about wealth, and I think about people's interest in investing, for example. Yeah. Many people these days want to be empowered and have a view on what assets they want to own. And it's actually getting broader as time goes on. And obviously there's more access. So people have ultimately more choice in how they represent their wealth from a more kind of operational perspective. But it's very difficult for people that have interest to have the time to feel confident enough to make the decisions or stick with the decisions. So when I think about, when we build product, we have these great products, but then I keep thinking, the challenge is actually not necessarily all of the functionality. The functionality is they do jobs, and I think you've got to help people do jobs effectively. But then I think with investing, it's like, how do you deliver confidence to someone that has an interest but doesn't necessarily have the time? And I think that's something that I think a lot about at the moment, because I don't think that the consumer knows what that really looks like. Because it probably doesn't look like a 50-page research document, as an example.
Yeah. It's right. Like one thing I have found as well, like you can't, when I, like probably 2 years ago, when I started to look at investing, like investing is such a broad thing. I look at share market, and like gold, crypto, property, business, and you go, I was started to do everything, and you can't do everything right at all. So now I'm slowly looking into what's kind of like the thing I'm really like the best at and most passionate about. And for me, that's definitely like business, like whether it's investing like through like in startups and building businesses, because it's dealing with people, it's with markets, it's just a lot of what I kind of know and enjoy. And with shares, for example, it's a very different game, in terms of
is it though? Should it be? Well, I guess it depends on your style and what you're trying to achieve from that investing. Yeah. When you invest in shares at the moment, are you viewing them as the same thing as when you invest in a startup or catchy?
Well,
do you think differently about it?
Yes, I do actually.
Because Buffett would say that you shouldn't.
No, right? I know that he says that, but I don't analyze. Well, first of all, I have way less control because I'm not taking control of the stake or even kind of close to that. Yeah, obviously. Yeah. with startups, I normally get either on the board or I'm involved in the advisory board, or there's more you can contribute. And I personally know the founder, CEO, and I know you should do, like with any share investment, you should do that as well, right? You should look at who's the CEO, who's the management team, what's the market, and do that research properly. And I agree, but I just don't do that because I can't take a big enough stake in that business through shares. So that's kind of like I was saying in the beginning, like I'm way more leaning towards taking higher risk with startups, because in that way, I mean, I'm more involved in that business.
Because you
You've got
feel
more
like you
control.
can touch it
Yeah,
more, right?
Yeah, or control, but yeah, touch it and
Like you can
contribute and
get the outcome through activism.
yes, yeah,
It's hard to be an activist investor in public markets unless you have a very big book.
yeah.
that you
That's why
can
you
play
buy
with,
shares
right?
in Nvidia and you go, okay, well, I'm going to call the CEO and have a chat with him about, you know,
I mean, it's kind of interesting though, right? Because
shit maybe, but
you think about public companies. You know, you could probably almost build. I don't know. I've for many years been a big admirer of Charlie Munger, and I almost feel like I know him, though, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Because I've spent so much time listening to him and reading about him and kind of getting an insight into how he thinks, that I almost feel like I know him or knew him. He's obviously passed away. And in terms of a public company CEO, you know, there is a lot of information out there if you can wade through all the information and find the interviews and find ways to get an insight. And one thing that Ackman said, and I think a previous podcast member was talking about Ackman, and he said what he would do is he'd go to a company that he's interested in. He would listen to previous calls, like from 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, and see how much as a percentage was actually done.
yeah.
And I think that's like an interesting way for in terms of public markets, trying to work out a way to actually get that feel of kind of not necessarily having influence, but having that conviction, that higher level conviction.
Yeah.
Because you've got such an experience in marketing, have you ever looked into more marketing based public equities at all? Because,
yeah, a little bit.
And you just haven't found any that are kind of quite as...
No, because it's more like marketing is such a strong part of successful businesses versus
Right,
like
so it's almost like anything.
Yeah, like Apple is like a marketing genius, right? Always have been. I mean, probably slightly less now, but people used to stay
overnight.
Stay overnight for the new release.
Yeah.
Like, how on earth do you achieve that? That's incredible. That's marketing and reputation and everything else. So it's more like looking at which companies nail their marketing that I kind of like look at.
You don't use Apple products though, huh?
No. No.
We had this conversation earlier.
Well, I was about to ask you, if I gave you $10,000, would you stop using them? But it's a bit of a silly question.
You can give me $10,000, I wouldn't even start using them.
Yeah.
I have everything Android and like my son, for example, he wants to become a game. He's always been into art, and he's into game art, and he's always been in Android and PC and everything else. But like the best tablet to draw on is the new kind of Apple.
Okay.
What's it called?
So it's not the Surface.
No, not the Surface. No, it's the Apple kind of what's it called, tablet.
Okay,
thing.
the new iPad.
Yes.
Okay, that's the best.
That's the best. Like he found it out, but he doesn't like Apple at all. But he bought it, and it's fantastic. He loves it. But he said, like, that's the only Apple thing I would ever get.
Yeah.
Right.
So,
you could offer me $10,000, I wouldn't take it. You know that, and talks about the strength of the product.
Yeah.
I wouldn't. I think even I'd be struggling with $50,000.
Really?
Yeah, and I found it so. I've tried it.
Yeah.
I've got a MacBook Pro at home.
Yeah.
I've never used it. Only a couple of times, and found it so hard to use. So not intuitive.
I just
but
mean,
that's like.
It's what you get used to, right?
That's what you get. Yeah.
I mean, we're cyborgs.
Yeah.
You know, like, so I'm connected to these devices.
Yeah.
You know, I believe that I put a pretty high value on like the devices you own. Like, I think if you're walking around with a broken device, you're kind of handicapping yourself in a sense. Like if your kind of career and your life depends on, you know, your devices in some way, I put a pretty high value on it just because it's basically an extra limb at this point, unfortunately. Yeah. But yeah, it's just Buffett asked was saying, how many people would actually take the $10,000 if they offered it to them? And I think it's quite a few, which shows you how great the Apple products is. But it's interesting though, because I don't want to buy Apple products, right? So I was forced into getting a new phone like 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, and I was so angry that I was forced into buying the phone because I loved my old phone, like the other one, and it was overheating. So I was like, they've upgraded the iOS and now it's overheating, and now I'm buying a new phone, and I hate that.
Yeah.
So it's kind of that interesting kind of push pull, and I think that a lot more people are moving away from Apple, as like they're losing the market a little bit more than a couple of years ago in terms of sentiment, I would say. But I would say in terms of Apple, like it'll be really interesting to see if they can reinvent themselves once more.
Yeah.
Especially with AI, because Siri is, in hindsight, the biggest flop ever in a way, because they've basically had like a 10-year advantage on Siri and never made it better. It's always been bad. So they'll probably partner with OpenAI and use their LLM, I imagine. And they should. They need to move a little bit faster, because if you think about how all the kind of primary large companies are these days, I was just thinking about it the other day. I was like, they're really embracing change, unlike other kind of cycles where kind of incumbents get disrupted by startups. Whereas in this kind of AI hype cycle, it's all the largest companies that are going in really heavily and embracing and moving very fast, which kind of, I would say, makes, the breakthrough, there would probably be less incremental breakthroughs from startups in this kind of realm because of the CapEx, like heavy nature of AI. And interestingly, their culture in their companies is quite interesting because they're being so proactive, which talks to their positive culture for innovation, which hasn't happened in other cycles.
So I've got one last question for you. You've given some pretty good advice while we've been talking. Is there anything that you would add to that for someone who's kind of starting on their pathway on trying to create wealth?
Yeah, I would definitely start with kind of like what you know, and just read up on that.
Yeah.
I did a lot of reading, like even basic books like Rich Dad, Poor Dad in the beginning. The Magic of Thinking Big has been a big influence for me as well. Think and Grow Rich from Napoleon Hill. So it's basically mindset first. I think first, like before you do anything, you have to work on your own mindset, because you don't believe you can be wealthy. You'll never be wealthy anyway, because it's like you'll create something and you don't believe you deserve it, and you get drawn to something and you make the wrong decision. So yeah, I would definitely say work on yourself first and your mental mindset around wealth. Because one of the other things that I talked about being on the school board and the chair, one of the things I'm working on with the school is eradicating poverty mindset, because a lot of people have that.
Yes.
Which is such an important on the other side of creating wealth. So really focusing on basically everybody in the community, kind of their mindset in terms of, what do you want to create from life? What does wealth mean to you? And even to an extent where you want people to see, and there's still a lot of that happening in New Zealand, regretfully, that money is a dirty word. Like I don't want money because then I'm like an evil person. It's like, well, it's the exact opposite. Maybe we're kind of influenced too much by movies and media, because actually with money you can create everything. Well, not everything. Almost anything you want. And anything you want to do in terms of doing good, like often comes from money as well, whether that's donating to your favorite charity or creating something, or do whatever you want to do. Without money, it doesn't happen. So you need to have that mindset in order to be able to create wealth in the first place. So, yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
It's been interesting. I feel like I've learnt lots.
Welcome. Cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
Lots of talking. Yeah, okay.